listeners to Spectral Margins, where the lines between reality and nightmare blur, and the shadows have more to say than we care to admit. I'm your host, Lucius Voss. Tonight, we journey into the depths, both physical and existential. We descend into hidden catacombs where ancient resentments fester, and we creep through the cold sterility of a hospital basement, where death isn't the end, but merely a threshold to something so much worse. First, we bear witness to a being of unspeakable origins, biding its time beneath the surface, whispering to the void, calling forth an annihilation long in the making. Then we'll follow two brothers venturing into the unknown, only to find that sometimes curiosity isn't just dangerous, it's deadly. The walls of a hospital should keep sickness and suffering contained, but what if something within refuses to stay dead? So sit back and keep the lights low. After all, some things are clearer in the dark. And now, Harbinger, a Flesh Schism Mythos Story by Corpse Child, and performed by Nick Goroff.
He rests upon a throne deep within the earth's recesses. This throne lies at the heart of a subterranean catacomb, crowned over top with a mighty structure. This throne is not, however, one of worship. It is not a throne of respect or piety, nor one of homage or leadership. This throne is not but a lookout, a watchtower, that he may sit and look out upon the ruinous plains of the world above him. Anytime he looks upon the terrain above, he sees it all the same, a mere fantasy. There's nothing to change his view either. This world was lost before it could begin. As he rests upon his subterranean throne, he observes the dwellers from above. Dull, dim, blind creatures they are, fleshlings. He watched their play with a burning rage that had built up from over a millennia inside of him. It was never understood to him how they could act as they do, so blindly, so dully, so primally, and yet still be the only intelligent life to survive for so long when so many others, such as his own brethren, are all but extinct. It wasn't fair, nor was it justified, given what his brethren suffered at their hands so long ago. His writhing, gangly body twitched madly underneath his albino tunic. 2 of his 5 overall mouths let forth a wail of anguish, lamenting the horrific memory of the blood he'd watched stain the sinewy soil on the world of Dermas, the world of the flesh. His mouth's wails echoed around the empty halls of the catacombs, further solidifying his haunting memory. He and his brethren had come only to seek temporary shelter and to evacuate, having already lost their own home, the world of Null. And to repay their generosity, they were rewarded with brutality. And in the end, they soon learned the folly of their actions when the same fate inevitably met Dermas. But that wasn't the end, was it? No. The handful of his brethren that remained chose to save one, taking it, in spite of his own protests, and ferrying it across the stars. What was worse, in doing this, They forgot all about him, their own brother, torn from the same cloth as them. He was left, mutilated and broken, when doom came to Dermas. And yet they valued the life of a flesh thing over their own. When the tyrannical, gluttonous star Chaos took Dermas, as it had so many worlds before, into its perpetually starving maw, he almost met his fate himself, alone, abandoned by his own kin in favor of a filthy, stupid fleshling. Such would not be his end, however, for summoning the remainder of his essence within him, he would evade the star's maw and trounce the stars himself, following after his cowardly, traitorous brethren. Time passed by, ages turning to eons, and he had not seen any sign of them until happening one moon upon a remote, secluded solar system that appeared untenanted, except for the planet he watched birth from the lone fleshling he sought after so vengefully. Until then, he had thought he himself was the last of any of the old natives from a damned lifetime, but now he knew he wasn't alone. The fleshling lived, and thus, a fragment of the old worlds, of the atrocities he was forced to witness in them, had been allowed to thrive. Overcome with rage, he came to this newborn world, a backwater world, locked all over with lush, healthy, and fungal soil. He sought to destroy the fleshling, for it was him and his kind that brought him so very nearly to oblivion, but he was far too weak. His body was broken and stripped of essence from his long sojourn across the stars. Not merely this, but as he had seen in the massacre of Dermas, the fleshlings were strong, vicious, and able to rend him limb from limb in mere seconds. No, he could never attack the fleshling directly. Instead, he came to another conclusion. He would reside upon this world, observing the new breed of fleshlings, and study them for their strengths and weaknesses. He would watch them for a time, and then, when he had learned them, he would appear to them and guide them straight into the oblivion he so narrowly avoided. This took time, of course. Years, centuries, generations passed with him merely watching from the shadows upon the new breed of fleshlings. These, he saw, weren't like those he'd known on Dermas. These creatures, these civilizations, bore an intelligence far greater than their ancestral counterparts. They bore the ability to articulate speech and to reason in their capacity to make decisions. These creatures possessed abilities of construction, of fellowship and community, and even of worship. They were an advanced form of life in every way to that of the natives of their former galaxy. Yet, at their core, he could see, they were still, and always would be, blind, dim-witted fleshlings, brutal and barbaric. They had to be destroyed. It was only right. He realized then that as he and his kin were cut from the cloth of the gluttonous star, he could feel when it would draw nearer and nearer. He could feel it, and he could call unto it. In his time observing them, he learned how to appear as one of them by guising himself in a gilded white robe that concealed his features, granting him the apparent appearance of one of their leaders, judging from the way so many prostrated before him on the occasions when he would surface to call upon the star. He would stand atop the peak of a tall and mighty and majestic temple, and call out to the sky above, in the fleshling's own dialect, which he'd also learned in his time of observance. He would bellow in thunderous tones, Uralka, Kaosralik Gain, Adrayokka. Those below him would recite his words, unknowledgeable of its meaning or its intent. But he, and only he, knew, and he delighted in this. Almost each time following this rite, a feral delirium would overcome the minds of the congregation, and they would slaughter each other with their bare hands, leaving none to survive. He knew this to be the fleshlings' doing, influencing them to destroy each other, to rid the world of him and his corruption through his rites. Here, then, he would retreat deep into his catacombs to avoid the wrath of the fleshling. He would sit upon his throne, as he does now, and he would ponder his work. Occasionally, there would be a surge that passes through his body that excites him. The star drew nearer, and he could feel it. It was only a matter of time now. But he is patient. He can wait. Yes, he calls the star and harbingers the extinction of all life itself.
That was Harbinger, written by Corpse Child and performed by Nick Goroff. A tale of patience, vengeance, and an unrelenting hunger lurking just beneath the surface. A reminder that history is never truly buried. It waits, festering for its time to return. You can check out more of Corpse Child's work on Facebook, Reddit, and pretty much anywhere where horror reigns and the shadows are welcomed. In fact, he has a new release called Swine Mountain, Book 2 of the Swine series on Amazon. Nick Goroff is a lingering specter in our haunted halls of fame, starring in films as well as sharing his vocal talents with the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights podcast. Next, we turn to another form of hunger, a nightmare woven from flesh and steel, a creature assembled from the remnants of the unclaimed and unloved. Some monsters are born, and some are built. Performed by myself, Lucius Voss, Lottie, and Vaden, this is Something So Vicious by Jason Frederick Myers. The two boys stepped into the elevator, and the smooth metal doors rattled shut, swallowing them like the mouth of a giant robot.
Where are we going?
10-year-old Luke asked.
Basement. That's where my friend saw it.
Dylan answered, pressing the elevator down button. Luke watched the doors nervously. Over the years, he had been tormented by many of Dylan's monster tales of Halloween legends, yet he secretly admired his older brother and always followed his lead. Luke had more than his fair share of hospitals since their father died. His mother, a traveling nurse, had refused to leave her two sons home alone ever since, confining them for hours in waiting rooms and cafeteria. There was something about hospitals that made him feel helpless, a place where even the bravest were reduced to witness the inevitable. They watched in silence as the floor indicator light displayed their descent.
Where did it come from?
Luke asked finally. Dylan shrugged.
Maybe it was here before the hospital, or maybe it came to prey on the sick.
He smirked.
Some people think it comes from the dead patients.
The elevator lurched suddenly and then stopped.
So it stays here?
I guess.
Dylan turned to face Luke with a sinister smile as the doors opened behind him.
Unless it sees something at once, like its skinny young boy.
The hospital's basement might have been a whole different world. The bright lights and sounds of the upper floors were long gone, the anemic light from the dated fixtures doing little to quell the darkness of the long hallway ahead. Shadows crept from all corners, age slowly overtaking the faded tile floors and walls like rot on fruit. They stepped off the elevator like a duo of unlikely time travelers surveying a new world.
Jesus.
Dylan muttered, eyeing the dilapidated walls. They moved slowly down the hall, unsure of their destination. After a moment, Luke said,
Let's turn back. We could get in trouble.
Dylan rolled his eyes. Luke had never been known for his bravery. Their mom wouldn't even let them watch R-rated movies.
Don't be a baby. There's nobody even down there.
They continued down the corridor and eventually arrived at a door on the right side of the hall.
Look.
Dylan continued, pointing to a gray sign on the door that read Morgue in small white letters. He tried the door's knob and it turned freely.
Follow me.
I don't know.
Luke said.
Isn't it full of dead people?
You won't see them.
Dylan responded.
They're tucked away in drawers. Besides, they're already dead, so they can't even hurt you.
The lighting inside the room was much better. A long stainless steel table sat in the center of the room, flanked by an industrial sink and drain. A steel cart nearby held a large basket scale and other medical supply.
That's where they weigh the body parts.
Dylan said, pointing to the scale. He lay on the autopsy table and pulled out his phone, snapping a selfie.
Dude, that's morbid.
Luke said, noting how much his brother resembled their father. An uneasy feeling crept over him, and he shook away the thought. Dylan laughed, admiring the picture.
There's no servers down here.
Luke surveyed the room. Medical signs and diagrams lined the walls. All bodies and body parts must be signed out, one sign read.
Look.
Dylan said, sitting up. Across from the table stood an industrial refrigerator door. A small sign near the door's handle read, Please place bodies in cooler feet first. Thank you. Dylan walked toward it.
Wait.
Luke whispered, backing toward the door.
Don't be a wimp.
Dylan said, grasping the door's handle. The cold metal sent a chill up his arm as he pulled it open. Behind them, a noise rang out, the sound of something metal hitting the floor in the hallway.
Somebody's coming.
Dylan hissed. They darted through a second interior door into a small office, passing a rusted metal desk and cabinet, and back out into the hallway, closing the door behind them. The hall stood empty. Another noise came from just behind them inside the office. They sprinted down the hall, searching for somewhere to hide. Dylan found an unlocked door marked Utility, and they stumbled inside, locking it behind them. They listened intently for any pursuer, but the floor was silent again. Dylan found a light switch and turned it on. A dumpster sat against the room's far wall beside the padlocked exterior bay door. 2 rows of large red trash bins sat neatly in the center of the room. The side of them read, Biohazard Waste in bold letters.
You should see your face.
Dylan laughed, leaning against the wall.
Looks like you crapped your pants.
Don't be an asshole.
Luke shot back. As they argued, the trash bin closest to Luke began to move, its lid lifting slightly. It moved again, the entire bin sliding a few inches on the smooth concrete floor. A second bin began to move, followed by a third. As they watched in disbelief, all the bins began to shake in unison, then stopped just as abruptly.
What the?
Dylan started, his voice trailing off. Luke stood motionless, tears beginning to well up in his green eyes. The bin closest to them moved again, shaking violently as if possessed. Without warning, the container pitched forward, landing on its side. Red plastic bags of medical waste poured onto the floor before them. Luke screamed.
Stop freaking out. It's just rats or something.
Dylan offered.
Listen, I lied. There's no monster down here.
I want to leave.
Luke said as an unknown liquid leaked from the bin. Suddenly, the waste bags on the floor began to move, stacking improbably on each other like grotesque snowmen. Another bin fell over, its contents joining the first. The red bags bonded together, forming one large mass. Something inside it began to tear its way out, shredding the bag like a tiger in a paper cage. Luke screamed, pressing his body against the wall as Dylan fumbled frantically with the door handle.
Go!
Luke yelled, pushing Dylan from behind.
It's stuck.
He said. Behind them, something large appeared, and Luke's eyes widened in terror. The giant creature standing before them had the form of a bear, but its anatomy was much different. It stood on two hind legs, the toes of its large feet adorned with razor-sharp medical scalpels and shears. Blood-soaked sheets and clothing lined its entire body, staples and stitches holding them together to ragged bits of human flesh and bone. Long IV tubes wrapped around its four limbs, like visible arteries, pumping old blood from an exposed, rotting heart on the exterior of its chest. Human nails and teeth hung together where joints should have been, clustered together like shields of armor. The entire face on the creature's massive head was painted in blood, and the top of its skull was fractured open, exposing small sections of oozing gray matter. It watched them through a pair of bulging, bloodshot eyes, then reached its two upper limbs towards them with claws made of hypodermic needles.
Open it.
Luke yelled as Dylan beat on the door. Finally, the lock came free. Luke and Dylan staggered into the hallway, running into a second figure as the door slammed shut behind them. "What are you doing down here?" a man's voice demanded. The man looked like sleep had long eluded him, dark, puffy bags hanging beneath his speedy blue eyes. His skin looked as pale as the surrounding walls, and his blue scrubs were at least 3 times too big for his frail frame. He stared down at them over a long, protruding nose, like an angry buzzard. The boys both began to speak, a cacophony of panic and mayhem. "Whoa," the man said, raising his hands. "Calm down. How did you get down here?" Luke spoke up.
There's a monster in there.
He stammered, pointing to the door. The man rolled his eyes. "Enough games. I'm calling security." He reached for the utility room door.
Sir, wait.
Dylan started, but the man waved a hand, cutting him off. "This room is to remain locked." Suddenly, the door flew open with great force. The creature rumbled out of the room on all fours like a charging bull, knocking the man to the floor. Luke and Dylan watched in horror as the beast trampled him without mercy, stomping his body repeatedly with its scalpel-covered feet and paws. His scrubs began to darken, fresh blood from clean punctures and lacerations soaking into the tattered garments. The man lay motionless as the creature's bloody mouth opened unnaturally wide, revealing several rows of mismatched, rotten human teeth. A loud, high-pitched noise blared from its mouth, a sound Luke instantly recognized from too many nights in hospitals, and from the last time he saw their father alive and told him goodbye. A moment replayed in his head 100 times a day like a sad song stuck on repeat. A chill as cold as the corpses in the morgue fridge rolled down his spine. The sound the creature emitted wasn't the growl of a dog nor the roar of a lion. It was the haunting, high-pitched drone of a heart monitor flatline, the sound of death. The smell of iron hung heavy in the hallway, like a noxious fume, as Luke felt hands on his shoulders.
Run!
Dylan yelled, pushing him further down the hall. They moved fast, fueled by adrenaline. After 30 feet, the first hallway dead-ended into a second. They stumbled to the right, looking for another exit. As they turned, Luke risked a look over his shoulder. The creature now stood on the man's chest on its two back legs, eyes glowing like two small computer monitors. It watched Luke intently as he ran, the eerie blue lights unblinking. They tried several locked doors. Behind them, the monster moved rapidly, its sharp metal digits raking along the cracked tile floor.
Here.
Dylan yelled, finding an unlocked door. He pushed Luke inside and followed him in, locking the door behind them. The room was dark except for the hall light coming in through the waist-high observation window that ran the length of the nearby wall. Another table sat in the middle of the room. An assortment of surgical tools lay neatly in rows on a large metal tray next to it. They hid in the shadows beneath the large window, shock setting in. Dylan checked on his younger brother. Luke looked pale. Tears streamed openly down his face, his body trembling uncontrollably. He tried comforting his brother, but found his hands shaking in horrified harmony. Dylan pulled out his cell phone. The screen lit up, reminding him of the creature's hideous eyes. He shuddered.
No service,
He said, dismayed.
We need to find a way out.
A noise came in from outside the window above them. Dylan locked the phone screen, extinguishing its light. The shrill screech of metal on glass raised the hair on Luke's neck, and he choked back another scream as a large, needled paw raked along the window inches overhead. Suddenly, a human face appeared, smacking forcefully against the glass. The unmistakable nose of the frail man from the hallway pressed hard against the window, popping grotesquely to one side. The rest of his body was gone. All that remained was his head, which appeared to grow out of the side of the creature's massive skull like a fungal spore. The monster stood outside the window on two legs, the dead man's deformed face smearing blood across the glass. As they cowered in fear, the mouth opened and screamed, the haunting sound of a flatline ringing behind its bloody tongue. They covered their ears as the sound infiltrated the tiny room. After a moment, the dead man's face retreated from the glass, slowly absorbing into the monster's head, like blood soaking into a bandage. The room fell silent. They waited, too terrified to move. Finally, Dylan spoke.
I think it's gone.
He whispered unevenly. He rose slowly to his knees and peered cautiously out the window as a faint noise came from somewhere inside the dark room.
What is that?
Luke stammered. Dylan used his phone's flashlight to scan the room. The stainless steel reflected the tiny beam of light, assaulting their eyes and making it difficult to see. The light came to rest on a medical sharps container hanging on the far wall. As they watched, the container began to shake just like the bins from the utility room, its contents rattling inside like an aerosol can. Without warning, the top of the container popped off and the creature's hand appeared from inside. The hand gripped the top of the container and began to pull itself out, strange liquid oozing from its needled fingers like hot wax from a candle. An arm appeared connected to the hand, followed by a torso and head as the creature from the hallway pulled itself out of the container and again took shape before their eyes like a genie emerging from a lamp. Luke felt lightheaded, his vision narrowing to a blur. Dylan grabbed him and shoved him towards the door as the surgical tools nearby started to shake, dancing on the metal tray like haunted bones in a coffin. They scrambled into the hall as the tray crashed to the floor. The elevator stood at the far end of the main hallway, its large metal doors closed. They ran toward it, desperately seeking escape. As they passed the still open utility room, Luke saw another bin crash to the floor inside, its contents again taking the creature's form. The elevator drew closer. They could hear the unmistakable sound of the monster's claws closing in behind them. Dylan was the first to the doors and frantically pressed the call button.
Come on.
He pleaded. The metallic iron stench returned, the smell heavy and palpable. Luke glanced instinctively over his shoulder as shadows appeared from the utility room, slithering into the dimly lit hall. The elevator arrived, its indicator bell startling them. The doors slowly opened, and they scrambled inside.
Close it!
Luke yelled as Dylan pressed an entire row of floor buttons. The doors began to move, shuddering in their tracks. Terrified, Luke looked back in the hall as the elevator doors slowly crept together. The creature had halved the distance between them with startling rapidity. It stood less than 20 feet away on his hind legs, eyes glowing blue like two small screens once again. It watched them with an unwavering gaze until the doors obscured its view, closing like a large metal curtain. The elevator groaned and began to move. Breathless, they collapsed to the floor, their minds struggling to comprehend what they'd just encountered. Something so evil, so vicious. Piedmont Hills Hospital's elevators were quiet, with no smooth jazz or easy listening pumping in from overhead speakers. If there were music, the boys might not have heard the haunting sound echoing beneath their feet as they ascended, the chilling sound of the constant flatline. Luke lay awake in the darkness of his second-story bedroom a few weeks later, thinking about the creature. It wasn't just its origin that weighed on his mind, but all the victims that gave it life. Every tooth, nail, bloody IV tube, and failed organ, each from a different tale of sorrow and loss. He began to think of his own organs. He placed a hand on his still beating heart and hoped that the 2 lights he saw glowing outside were just the neighbor's Christmas decorations or his mother coming home early from work. He hoped the shrill, scratching noise his ears heard coming from just beyond his bedroom window was just the wind blowing tree branches against the glass. But his brain knew there were no trees near his home. That was Something So Vicious by Jason Frederick Myers. A reminder that hospitals are places of healing, but also of loss, and sometimes what is lost refuses to stay gone. Jason Frederick Myers lives in the upstate of South Carolina, USA. A lifelong fan of suspense and horror, he grew up reading Shirley Jackson, Clive Barker, and Stephen King, and draws inspiration from the classic tales that terrified him as a child. His fiction can be found at Dark Winter Lit, Black Sheep Magazine, The Horror Zine, and various other anthologies. Be sure to follow him on X at Jason F. Myers. Our stories tonight have taken us deep into the unknown and into the waiting dark that lingers beneath and beyond. Whether in the depths of the earth or in the sterile halls of a hospital, one thing remains the same. The margins of the spectral are closer than we think. This is Lucius Voss reminding you to keep your lights low and your ears open. And if something stirs in the dark, listen carefully. It may just be whispering your name. Until next Tuesday, good night.